Paul, will you answer that phone, please?
Okay, dear. Hello?
Mr. Erickson?
Speaking.
This is Mr. Costa of Midtown Buick, sir. Well, I understand from a mutual acquaintance that you're planning to buy a new car. I was wondering if you wouldn't be thinking about a Buick, would you, sir?
What's that you're selling?
Buicks. A Buick is a pretty good car, sir, and...
Look, Mac, I'll give you a bit of advice. If you want to bring a Buick around to my place, I'll give you a good trade on it toward a real car.
Well, I don't understand.
You've picked the wrong guy to pull that mutual acquaintance gag on, buddy. I'm a Hudson salesman.
A Hudson salesman? Oh, well, I guess then in that case, goodbye.
Well, that little incident actually happened. And it's a good way to get into our subject of locating prospects by phone. Now, sitting here alongside of me is Bert Wilson and Gene Riga. Bert and Gene are doing an outstanding job of selling Hudsons and Ramblers for Center Motors Incorporated of Maliko, Michigan. We've asked them to tell us how they use the telephone in their work. After we've heard what they have to say and listened in on a few of their calls, you'll have a chance to talk over their recommendations and their telephone technique. Bert, suppose we start with you. What would you say is the one big thing that accounts for your success in selling by telephone?
Whoa, wait a second. You can't sell over the telephone.
It looks like I put my foot in it that time, Bert. Suppose I start over again. What is the one big thing that accounts for your success in prospecting by telephone?
Well, that's kind of hard to say. I suppose if I had to pick one thing, I'd say it was because I make 20 prospecting calls a day.
You make 20 calls every day?
That's right. That's a rule I laid down for myself. You see, I'm a lazy guy by nature, but I've also got a wife and 3 kids, and we all got the eating habit. So I make 20 calls a day, and it gets results for me. Sales, I mean.
I see.
I make 10 calls in the morning and 10 calls in the afternoon, getting them all in at one clip. That way, I make sure to get them done.
You seem to work pretty systematically, Bert.
Systematically? He's a regular old woman. You should see him when he's making phone calls.
Well, it's not as bad as Gene says it is, but I like to have everything in front of me when I call.
What do you mean by everything?
Well, I always make sure I've got a card for each prospect and a pad for taking notes. And I've got an outline of the things I'm going to say and a list of common objections with their answers. That's all.
Brother, that's enough.
I take it you don't always agree with Bert, Gene. Tell us, what single thing does the most to make your telephone work pay off?
Well, I'd say telephoning in the evening is what pays off most for me. You know, when the man of the house is home.
Gene, about this business of telephoning in the evening, doesn't that call for extra work on your part?
No, I don't think it's extra work. It's part of my job. Like Bert, I'm looking to make an extra buck. Another thing, the way I am, I like to be really good at what I do, and I like being one of the leading salesmen in our dealership. And that calls for work. You know, I found that a couple of hours on the phone in the evening, plus the calls I make during the day, gets me an average of 5 or 6 appointments a day, 5 days a week. When I was trying to sell on a hit or miss basis, you know, starting out in the morning without knowing where I was going that day, why, I wasn't making half of what I make today.
Gene, can you keep 5 or 6 appointments a day? I mean, and do a complete selling job.
Well, sometimes I can't keep them, but actually, I always try to make more appointments than I can keep. See, in that way, if some cancel out, I'm not left with a hole in my working day. And if I can't keep any appointments, I call them up beforehand and set a new time.
And that sounds like an idea worth trying. Okay, thanks, Gene, and you too, Bert, for those ideas. Now, at this point, we're going to play the tape recordings we made of a few of your telephone calls to prospects. We'll ask the men out front to listen carefully, and afterwards maybe we'll have some suggestions for improving your telephone prospecting technique. Okay?
Sure, let's do it.
Okay by me?
All right, let's hear the first call, the one made by Bert. That is, if I can get this tape recorder started. Okay, there it goes. Let's have it quiet.
Hello?
Good afternoon. Is Mr. Kohler at home?
Oh, no, he's at work. Can I take a message for him?
Oh, well, I just wanted to have a little talk with him. Does your husband have any objection to getting personal calls during working hours, Mrs. Kohler? I thought I might call him this afternoon.
Oh, yes, you can call him at work. It's quite all right. He works for the Associated Fruit Growers, extension 405. May I ask who's calling?
My name is Bert Wilson, but it's nothing important. Well, thanks very much, Mrs. Kohler.
Bert Wilson? Oh, all right.
All right, that's the first call. Now, if I'm not mistaken, the next one is one of yours, Gene, made about 7:30 in the evening. Here we go.
Hello?
Good evening. May I talk to Mr. Vigilante, please?
You wait, sir. I get him. He's down in the cellar. Mike! Mike! Somebody on the telephone for you. I don't know.
Hello?
Good evening, Mr. Vigilante. I understand you were down the cellar. I hope I didn't pick the wrong time to call you.
Oh, no, that's all right. I was coming up anyway. Who's this?
This is Gene Riga of Central Motors, your local Hudson dealer. Are you still driving a 51 Chrysler, Mr. Vigilante?
Yeah, I still got it. But if I buy a new car, I'll get another Chrysler. It's a good car.
Oh, yes, it's not a bad car, Mr. Vigilante. But have you driven in a new Hudson?
No, but,
Mr. Vigilante, before you buy any car, you owe it to yourself to drive this year's Hudson. It's a completely different car from bumper to bumper. It's the safest car on the road. Now, I can bring one to your house tomorrow. No obligation. Just want you to compare before you buy. Are you home during the day? How about tomorrow morning?
no, I'll be on a job until 4:30 in the afternoon.
I say, do you work downtown, Mr. Vigilante? Do you drive to work?
No, I take the West Side bus to the National Machine Company. But no, I
I'll tell you what. Instead of taking the bus home tomorrow after work, look for me right outside the gate at 4:30. Now, I'll be in a flashy new Hudson, a light blue one. You can drive it home, okay?
Well, if you want to go to all that trouble, okay. But my mind is made up to get another Chrysler.
Well, you got an appointment out of that call, Gene. Now let's listen to this call by Bert Wilson. Bert really runs into a rough one on this call.
Hello? Curry's Liquor Shop.
Good afternoon. Mr. Curry?
Yeah, this is Mr. Curry. Who's this?
Mr. Curry, this is Bert Wilson of Center Motors, your neighborhood Hudson dealer. Have you seen the reclining seats on the new Hudson? And the way they make up into beds? A lot of people...
Now, wait a second, Wilson. You may as well save your breath. I wouldn't own a Hudson if you gave it to me, so there's no point in talking about it. You're wasting your time.
Well, have you ever owned a Hudson, Mr. Curry?
No, and I don't intend it. They cost too much to begin with, and after a couple of years, you get next to nothing for them.
Well, if you've never owned a Hudson, aren't you just repeating a rumor?
Rumor, nothing. It's a well-known fact. Now, look, I don't have time to argue with you. I've got work to do. Goodbye.
Wow, there's a guy with positive opinions. I bet you love that kind, don't you, Bert?
Yeah, I'd like to spit in his eye.
Okay, our time is running out, so let's pick up just the middle part of this call by Gene.
So, can you give me an idea of what you'd give me for my Buick on a trade?
Not without looking at it, Mr. Lyons. I'd have to see it first.
Oh, but I'm telling you, it's in perfect condition. I mean, you can give me a rough idea, can't you? I won't hold you to it.
Well, I can tell you what it's listed at in the book, but that isn't much help. Why don't you bring it in? We're really giving wonderful deals. I know you'll be pleasantly surprised.
All right, I'll stop in later in the week.
Mr. Lyons, suppose I drive out there tomorrow night. I have an opening in my appointment book for 6:15.
Oh, no, don't do that. My wife is sick, and I won't be able to talk to you.
Oh, well, I'm sorry to hear that, Mr. Lyons. Nothing serious, I hope.
No, she just got a touch of the virus.
I see. I know just how you feel. My wife came down with virus a few weeks ago. But look, suppose I call you in a week or so, and we'll see if we can get together then.
Sure, sure. Well, call me sometime later on. We'll see.
Right, Mr. Lyons.
Well, I guess that's all the phone calls we'll have time for. Say, on that last phone call, Gene, how'd you make out? Did you ever get to see Lyons?
Not yet. I only made that call the other day, but I made a note of his wife's illness on the prospect card, and I'll call him back for sure.
Say, did you notice the way Gene specified the exact time of the appointment? He told the prospect he'd meet him at 6:15.
What about it, Gene? Why pick an exact time? Why not just say between 6 and 6:30?
Well, when you make your appointments on the quarter hour, it sounds more definite. You're less likely to run into refusals. People usually make dates and do other things on the hour or half hour. And it helps another way, too. Making appointments on the quarter hour gives people the idea you won't take longer than 15 minutes. So they say to themselves, what the heck, I can hold him off for 15 minutes. I'll see him.
Wow, you fellas really get down to fine points, don't you?
You've got to in this business. Every word you say counts.
Well, I wish we could talk some more about this, Gene, but suppose we turn the meeting over to the men who are listening and let them discuss some of the things you fellas said and did. Hudson salesmen with the Metropolitan, the Rambler, the Wasp, and the Hornet, we are in a position to reach 95% of the automobile market. That means almost everyone who owns a car is a prospect for one of our new models. Yet if we started out to contact people at random by telephone, it would take too many telephone calls to locate one good active prospect. We can cut down the number of telephone calls it takes to find a good prospect by concentrating on those car owners most likely to buy at this time. And who are they? Well, the number one prospects are owners of 2-, 3-, and 4-year-old Hudsons who are store owners, executives, or professional men. That is, doctors, lawyers, architects, and so forth. They are not only partial to Hudsons, but they are the ones most likely to have the money to buy. Of course, all Hudson owners are good prospects, as are owners of other late model cars in the same price class. Calls on these main groups are most likely to produce the best results. Now, with that introduction, let's listen to how the questions you've been discussing were answered by a panel of experienced, successful Hudson salesmen and dealers. The first question dealt with what you thought could be accomplished over the telephone. If you checked all the answers except the last one, you are in complete agreement with our panel. The telephone is a great time saver for automobile salesmen. But one thing a phone call cannot do is actually sell the car. That has to be done when face-to-face with a prospect. And that's why the primary objective of a prospecting phone call is to set up an appointment. To do this, you have to create interest. But it's a mistake to give a complete selling talk during the phone call. The panel agreed that it's wise to say only enough to make the appointment. Well, question 2, ask what you thought of this statement by Bert.
I make 20 prospecting calls a day, 10 in the morning and 10 in the afternoon.
The panel picked answer A to this question. They agreed that making a set number of calls each day is a good idea. By setting a goal, instead of just phoning whenever you have the time or inclination, you get the job done. Assure yourself of a steady flow of prospects and will be less likely to find yourself wondering in the morning where to go that day. Question 3 dealt with this remark by Bert.
When I call, I keep an outline in front of me of the things I'm going to say and a list of possible objections with their answers.
Answer C won the panel's votes. They thought Bert was smart to work out an approach to the typical responses you get when prospecting over the phone. You're certain to get people on the phone who say they are not in the market for a new car, and those who say they are going to buy another make of car, and those who are primarily concerned with the trade-in allowance, and so on. If you pre-plan your handling of the typical situations, you're less likely to find yourself fumbling for something to say and losing control of the conversation. Now, later we'll have suggestions for handling some of the more typical situations, but we're running out of room on this side of the record. Right now, let's consider this statement by Gene, which is the basis of question 4.
Telephoning in the evening is what pays off most for me. You know, when the man of the house is home.
The panel split their vote on this question. Most of the panel picked answer A. If a salesman really works during the day, he doesn't have to spend time calling people in the evenings in order to make a living.
Can I say something about that?
Well, sure, Bert, go ahead.
Well, I agree with what was just said. During the day, you can reach store owners, executives, and professional people by phone. They're A1 prospects. And if a salesman keeps sending out cards, making a set number of phone calls during the day, and sets up 5 good appointments a day, he can relax in the evening and still make a good living selling cars.
Thanks, Bert. A strong minority of the panel voted for answer B, however. Sure, they said it's not necessary to make evening calls in order to make a living, but it does produce good results and really pays off for the salesman who wants to boost his earnings. Isn't that the way you feel about it, Gene?
Yes, it is. Since I started putting in a couple of hours on the phone in the evening, my take-home pay has really picked up. And I'll keep doing it, too, because, like I told you, I want to make some extra dough. And by the way, when I make evening calls, I always begin by asking the prospect, you're not having dinner, are you? See, showing consideration like this usually puts the conversation on a friendly basis right away.
Okay, Gene. Thanks for those ideas. Now let's move on to question 5, which dealt with the first phone call and whether Bert should have talked new car to the wife when he learned the husband was not at home. Some of the panel voted for answer A. They thought Bert should have talked about a new car with the wife, sounded her out on the subject. But after much discussion, most of the panel picked answer C. While women may often influence the make of car bought, its color, and so on, the idea of buying a new car, they believed, generally starts with the husband. So the panel felt that as a general rule, it's best to start talking new car with the husband. That is, unless you cannot avoid the subject when the wife answers the phone.
Well, that's the way I feel, too. If you let the wife know you're going to talk to her husband about a new car, she generally gets a hold of him before you call and gives them a lot of reasons why they shouldn't spend money on a new car or should spend it on something else.
Okay. Now let's talk about question 6, which asks your opinion of calling people at their office or shop. The panel liked answer B. Nowadays, they said, there's seldom any objection to an employee receiving a personal call. This holds true particularly for office workers, but even people in a shop get calls these days. In many cases, prospects would rather talk about a new car during working hours than in the evening when they may be watching TV or having friends in. While on this subject, one panel member pointed out that it's a good idea to offer to meet the prospect after work and give him a demonstration ride home. Matter of fact, this is the subject of question 7. Remember what Gene told Mr. Vigilante?
Instead of taking the bus home tomorrow after work, look for me right outside the gate at 4:30. I'll be in a flashy new Hudson, a light blue one. You can drive it home, okay?
Well, if you want to go to all that trouble, okay, but I'll tell you, my mind's made up to get another Chrysler.
The panel liked answer B to question 7. They thought Gene demonstrated aggressive selling in this instance, and they approved it. They didn't agree at all that this kind of selling irritates most people. Sure, maybe a few individuals will back away from forceful selling, but most prospects are flattered when the salesman goes to great lengths to interest them in his make of car. In today's challenging market, the panel agreed the salesman should be pleasantly aggressive. That is, he should be tactfully persistent and not easily discouraged if the prospect doesn't respond right away. A really friendly telephone manner goes a long way in helping you overcome any resentment about your persistence or insistence. And by the way, your local telephone company undoubtedly offers free booklets on good telephone manners and telephone technique. After this meeting, call them up and ask them for a copy. It's well worth any salesman's time to read up on the subject of using the phone to best advantage. Well, Bert ran into a rough situation on his call to a liquor store owner. Remember what happened? Bert tried to arouse interest in the new Hudson by mentioning a few of the outstanding features, which is ordinarily a good approach. But here's what happened.
You may as well save your breath. I wouldn't own a Hudson if you gave it to me, so there's no point in talking about it.
Well, have you ever owned a Hudson, Mr. Curry?
No, and I don't intend to. They cost too much to begin with, and after a couple of years, you get next to nothing for them.
Well, if you never owned a Hudson, aren't you just repeating a rumor?
Rumor or nothing, it's a well-known fact. But look, I don't have time to argue with you. I've got work to do.
Fortunately, we don't run into those sour apples very often. The panel sympathized with Bert's opinion of this prospect, but just the same, they chose answer C to question 8. They thought you made a mistake in the very beginning, Bert, by going on the defensive when Curry said he wouldn't own a Hudson.
On the defensive? Well, all I said was, have you ever owned a Hudson? And sure enough, he never had. I just wanted to take the wind out of his sails.
Well, sure, that's just it, Bert. You made him look foolish, so naturally he got sore.
Yeah, well, maybe that's right. But I don't like these wise guys who give you a hard time. If he wasn't interested, why didn't he just say so and let it go at that?
Bert, the panel thought you'd get more satisfaction out of selling a Hudson to this kind of prospect than in taking the wind out of his sails. So here's what they did. 2 of the panel members made a tape recording of one way that situation could have been handled. Suppose I play it.
Okay, sure.
All right? Let's listen to it.
Good morning, Mr. Curry. This is Joe Dokes at Center Motors, your local Hudson dealer. Oh, say, if you have some customers to take care of, I can call you back a little later.
No, it's okay. What can I do for you?
Well, Mr. Curry, the new Hudson is reported to be the safest car on the road. Have you had an opportunity to drive one?
Now, wait a second, Doc. Save your breath. I wouldn't take a Hudson if you were giving them away. So there's no point in talking about it. You're wasting your time.
I'm sorry you don't like the Hudson, Mr. Curry. Would you take just a minute to tell me why you feel the way you do? I'd be very interested in hearing what you had to say.
Well, they're overpriced, for one thing, and the depreciation rate's terrible.
If that were true, Mr. Curry, I could certainly understand your viewpoint, but, well, here's something interesting. A recent survey showed that only one other make of car, Cadillac, had a higher percentage of owner loyalty than Hudson. Well, don't you agree that there must be a reason why Hudson owners continue to buy Hudson year after year?
I don't go for that survey stuff. It means nothing to me. Look, as far as I'm concerned, a DeSoto is the car to buy, so...
Well, Mr. Curry, I don't often run into people who have such a definite opinion about cars as you do. As a liquor store owner, you must talk with a lot of people during the day. Now, quite honestly, you're the kind of person I'd like to have boosting my car because you can influence a great many people. What I'm getting at is, if you were in the market for a new car, we would go out of our way to give you a real good deal on the completely restyled Hudson, just to get you in our corner, so to speak.
Yeah? What kind of deal could I get?
Well, I guess we've gone far enough, Bert. I think you'll agree that if you can get the Curry-type prospects to the point where they want to talk deal, you at least have a chance to do some selling. Of course, if the salesman just started out by offering a good deal, it would have accomplished very little, right, Bert?
Well, I gotta admit, the sugar and molasses approach is better than trying to make the prospect admit he's wrong.
The point is, as the panel agreed, you're bound to run into people who say they're not interested in your make of car. Every automobile salesman runs into that situation. The thing to do is to get a person like this to tell you why he feels the way he does. Then you know where to go from there. Okay, let's move on to question 9. Remember, Gene wouldn't quote an approximate trade-in figure over the phone. The panel liked answer B. They agreed you should never quote a trade-in figure until you've seen the car. Well, Gene almost made a mistake at this point, but he caught himself in time. Remember what he said?
Well, I can tell you what it's listed at in the book, but that isn't much help. Why don't you bring it in? We're really giving wonderful deals. I know you'll be pleasantly surprised.
All right, I'll try to stop in later in the week.
Asking a prospect to stop in at the sales room is a sure way of letting him slip out of your hands. Some aggressive salesman is apt to sell him before he ever gets to your showroom, if he really intended to come in the first place. Of course, Gene realized this, and he corrected himself right away. He offered to go out to the prospect's house and appraise the car. But the prospect begged off with the excuse that his wife was sick. Well, Gene made a note of that on his prospect card and promised to call the following week. And that's the subject of question 10. The panel marked answer A. They thought Gene did the best possible thing at this point. Even if Lyons was stalling, which may or may not have been the case, Gene has a good talking point for his next call. He can always open up like this.
Mr. Lyons, this is Gene Riga of Central Motors. Oh, how is Mrs. Lyons?
Mrs. Lyons? Oh, she's fine.
All over that virus, hmm?
Virus? Oh, yes, she's feeling fine, thank you.
Good, I'm glad to hear that. I guess you'll be able to take that ride in the Hudson you wanted to take before. Suppose I pick you up at...
Well, this prospect would have a tough time refusing that kind of approach. Now, before winding up this session, let's listen to one more prospecting call. The panel thought this one of the best approaches they'd heard in a long time.
Hello. Good evening, Mr. Isaacs. This is Gene Riga at Center Motors, your local Hudson dealer. Say, are you acquainted with Tom Weber?
Tom Weber? No, I don't believe I am. Why do you ask?
He's a neighbor of yours. Lives on Orchard Lane, the next street over from yours. Well, Tom bought a new Hudson from us last week, and he's crazy about it. Says he's been bragging about it to all the neighbors. So I wondered if he'd talked with you and maybe gave you a ride in it.
No, I don't know him.
Oh. Well, Mr. Isaacs, I am sure that if you had a ride in the new Hudson, you'd feel the same way about it as Tom Weber does. Now, I'll be glad to arrange it at your convenience. What's a good time for you? During the day or in the evening after dinner?
What? To tell you the truth, I'm not really in the market for a new car right now.
Oh, that's all right, Mr. Isaacs. I'd appreciate it if you would test drive this completely new Hudson. After you had a ride, would you do me a favor?
What's that?
Well, if you're as impressed with this completely new Hudson as I'm sure you will be, would you let me send a picture postcard of it to 3 of your friends, telling them that you've had a ride in it and that you recommended they drive it before buying a new car? And remember, that's only if you really like this new Hudson. See, it's part of a Get Acquainted with Hudson campaign we're putting on right now.
Well, I guess that's all right.
Thank you, Mr. Isaacs. Suppose I stop by your house at 7:45 tonight. Is that a good time for you?
Well, yes, that'll be all right.
Gentlemen, that's a telephone approach you can tailor to your own style and personality. It simply involves calling up the neighbors of anyone who buys a car from you. And it really gets results. Give it a try today. To sum up what we've covered in this meeting, the telephone can be your most valuable source of prospects. Make the best use of it by resolving to make a set number of calls each day and every day during the week to line up enough appointments to keep you busy every day. On that score, a couple hours on the phone in the evening will produce plenty of prospects for you, and prospects mean more sales. Use a friendly, folksy, down-to-earth approach to the people you call, but don't hesitate to be pleasantly aggressive. In fact, you can be well prepared for resistance by figuring out in advance how you're going to handle the typical situations you're bound to run into. And don't let the occasional sour apple spoil your taste for telephoning. You'll soon learn how to turn the rough customers into Hudson owners. Yes, do these things and you'll find yourself making a lot more money with a lot less effort. Go to it. Good luck and good selling.